So you know, you can always tell it's summer. Not by the weather change, obviously we haven't really felt summer weather yet. Not particularly by everyone going on vacation, although that seems to be the case right now, that everyone's on vacation. I think there's one way you can tell it's summer without ever actually walking outside of your house. It's by just watching television. The commercials suddenly change when it goes from winter, fall and winter into spring and summer. I don't know if you've noticed this or not. But the other day, I was at home, of course sitting on my couch as I like to do when I'm at home, and I was watching television, and during a two-hour movie I was watching, I literally watched, I think I counted about 18 commercials. 18 commercials had something to do with a fitness program, a diet plan, or a local gym, all in the time frame of about 2 hours. Within that time, I literally saw an ad for the Insanity program, Shaun T's Rocking Body Fitness. I was invited to join LA and Planet Fitness all at one time. I was also encouraged to start the Nutrisystem and Jenny Craig diet programs, all within 2 hours. And you know this stuff doesn't happen during the winter, because we're all like stuffing our face at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and no one's thinking about diets or fitness or anything like that. But as soon as the weather changes, everyone's minds go to like beach bodies and getting in shape and going on vacation, and you have to join all these things. So you can probably spend thousands and thousands of dollars in the span of 2 hours if you just called every number and said, I want to join. So I was watching all these things, and of course while I'm sitting on my couch, being lazy, chewing on a jar full of Keebler's soft batch cookies, I'm encouraged to lose a few pounds. But in the midst of all the noise of personal fitness and dieting, a friend of mine online directed my attention to a fitness program that stands alone as the most unique fitness program I have ever seen in my life. This morning I'd like to introduce you to a fitness program from the 80s that didn't catch on back then, back in the mid-80s, but I think it's making a revolution, so to speak, today. And with enough attention via the internet, I think this fitness program will surpass the rest very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I give you Prancercise.
Okay. Hello, I'm Joanna Rohrbeck of Prancercise LLC, and I'm here today to show you the 4 moves of Prancercise. I've got my ankle weights in place, and my music's ready. So let's stop talking and do some walking.
Everybody's going to cut it off there. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be working so well, but you get the idea, I think. It's probably the oddest workout program I've ever seen in my life. After seeing the video for the first time, I knew I had to know a little bit more about the woman who invented it. So I looked her up, and lo and behold, her name is, you saw her name, Joanna Rohrbeck. And because of this video, all of a sudden it's gone viral, unexpectedly. Someone found it on YouTube and just started distributing it, and now it's got like billions or millions of hits. She's been doing some interviews, and she looks exactly the same. The lady hasn't aged one bit. This is 30 years old. Yeah, it's filmed in 1989 when she filmed this. And the lady hasn't aged. But during an interview she was doing on CBS, she explained how she came up with this revolutionary workout regimen. And she said she liked to power walk. But while she was power walking, she would walk past a horse ranch and saw these horses prancing and trotting and doing all these other steps on the ranch. And so she had some music on, and she just got a little more rhythmical, a little springy, a little spring in her step. And before she knew it, she had a workout routine to package and sell to the world. But what's hilarious, but the funniest part is that it didn't sell at all back in the 80s. No, I don't think anyone even knew what it was. But now it's starting to sell all of a sudden. She has the DVDs available on her own website, and she said that she sold it out with them. She's actually hoping to get to the point where she can buy a gym and start a Prancercise gym where she actually has horses walking with people around a track. Driving people around the track. She lives in Florida, so if you're on vacation in Florida, or if you plan on moving there or anything, look her up. She may have the new, hip place to go work out. But, yeah. Hold off judgment before, or don't cast judgment on me right away without hearing me out. But I think it's safe to say that Joanna is an odd person. She's an odd person who has odd ideas of what it means to be fit, to be in shape, to work out. In a world of like Shaun T and like, what's the lady from, who am I thinking of? from the weight loss show, what's it?
Jillian Michaels.
Jillian Michaels. In the world of Shaun T and Jillian Michaels, Joanna stands out. She's a little different. I don't know, maybe Ben's going to be teaching this program in his PT, in his doctorate level classes. He's going to be teaching this as his dissertation. But she's different and she's odd. But I think it's safe to say that we're all a little odd in one shape or form or another. The truth is, we're all odd when we look at ourselves closely enough, and if we're honest with one another enough. We all have those things that make us a little different from one another. I know I'm a little odd, and you know I'm odd. I'm a 6-foot man that drives a 3-foot car. I cheer and I'm obsessed with a baseball team that's lost 20 years in a row. I get it. I'm a little bit odd. I don't enjoy hunting deer or rabbit or birds, but I enjoy hunting Bigfoot. I get it. I'm a little bit different than most, but we all are in one way or another. And I think we all should be able to identify ourselves as being a little different, a little odd, simply because we consider ourselves followers of Jesus. If we consider ourselves followers of Jesus, or a disciple of Christ, or a disciple of Jesus, we should be seen as odd or different to the world around us. If the unbelieving world does not see you as a little bit different, or a little bit, safe to say, odd, there may be something wrong in your relationship with God. There may be something not quite right in your discipleship with Jesus. If the world doesn't see you as any different whatsoever than anybody else in the world around you, then perhaps you're not as much of a disciple as you once thought you were. By the world's standards, we should all be seen as a little bit different and a little bit odd, because that's how God calls us to be. The story we're reflecting on this morning comes from Joshua chapter 6, and we're continuing our story, our teaching series through the book of Joshua. And if you haven't been here, just to give you some context, the book of Joshua follows the story of Israel's conquest of the land of Canaan, the land promised to the descendants of Abraham many generations prior to the actual story which we will be reading. And up to this point in the story, we've read about how Moses has died and Joshua has taken over leadership of Israel. And God has commanded Joshua to finally enter the promised land, the land of Canaan, and take it as Israel's rightful place to live, as their land flowing with milk and honey, as the place that they will now inhabit for generations and generations. And God finally calls up Joshua to lead them, and what we read a few weeks ago was of Joshua's leading the Israelites across the Jordan River. We saw them miraculously crossing the Jordan, much like Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt by crossing the Red Sea. So we finally entered the promised land. We're finally on the western shores of the Jordan River. And here's where we pick up the story in Joshua chapter 6. Actually, we're going to start at the end of Joshua chapter 5 to pick up the first couple verses there. Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 starts with this. He says, "When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, 'Are you friend or foe?' 'Neither one,' he replied. 'I am the commander of the Lord's army.' At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. 'I am at your command,' Joshua said. 'What do you want your servant to do?' The commander of the Lord's army replied, 'Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy.' And Joshua did as he was told." We're going to stop there for a moment. In case you missed it, this past Thursday was the 69th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. And I think for many of us, most of us, it's safe to say we're fairly far removed from the invasion of Normandy. Most of the World War II generation is sadly dying off, and we're losing that connection we had to the greatest generation. But thankfully we have things like movies and books and things that remind us of what that day was like. And I remember when I was younger, it was in the late 90s when Saving Private Ryan came out. I don't know, have you seen everyone's seen Saving Private Ryan, I assume? I saw Saving Private Ryan when it came out in the theater, and I can remember distinctly sitting among older men whom I assumed were World War II veterans. And the only way I could make that safe assumption was when I looked around as I watched them weeping at the depiction of the D-Day invasion, because of how accurately they said it was portrayed. And it forced me to recognize the extremity of what happened that day on the beaches of Normandy. When our men, and when men and women, or men from all the Allied nations stormed the beaches of Normandy in order to liberate France from the grips of Nazi Germany. And the sacrifice that was being made on that day, that fateful day, it's just astounding. But when I read the story in Joshua chapter 5, these last couple verses of the chapter, I read and I see Joshua's interaction with the commanding angel, the commander of the Lord's armies, and I expect that the next following chapter is going to be an invasion of the scope of like D-Day. I'm expecting that when Joshua interacts with this being standing there with a sword in his hand, that the very next chapter is going to depict a military battle that is up the scale of what Saving Private Ryan depicted on the beaches of Normandy. There's going to be a massive invasion. There's going to be rocks from the wall of Jericho tumbling because the Lord is leading Israel over the walls and taking the city of Jericho by force. That's what the world expects, and that's what I think the Spirit is trying to lead us to expect from God when we read these final verses in chapter 5 of Joshua. We are expecting a gut-wrenching battle full of brilliant military strategy that would maybe be copied by militaries around the world for the rest of human history. However, what we get when we actually begin Joshua chapter 6 is anything but what we might expect. In fact, the strategy God employs to topple the city of Jericho might even be described as, well, a bit odd and unexpected. So let's carry on with Joshua chapter 6, the first 5 verses. Joshua reads like this. It says, "Now the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people were very afraid of the Israelites. No one was allowed to go in or out. But the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and its strong warriors. You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. 7 priests will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. On the 7th day, you're to march around the town 7 times, with the priests blowing their horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horns, have all the people shout as loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people will charge straight into the town." When we read this, we have to ask, the writer's forcing us to stop and say, what is going on? We just had Joshua interacting with this being who calls himself the commander of the Lord's armies. We're expecting this huge assault. We're expecting battering rams and flaming arrows and swords and mighty warriors clashing. And yet, God tells Joshua to do nothing like that. God tells Joshua to walk around the city 6 or 7 times. God tells Joshua to lead a parade of sorts with blowing horns and celebration, it sounds, around the city. God's telling Joshua to almost literally make his fighting men and his entire nation vulnerable to the attacks of Jericho from the walls above them. We're not getting anything we expect from God in terms of a strong military fight, an epic battle between Israel and the city. I would have loved to have seen the faces of the warriors and the priests when Joshua issues this command to them that God has given him. These warriors must have been sitting there thinking, what do you want us to do? You don't want us to scale these walls? You don't want us to beat down these doors? You want us to just walk around in circles? What is going on? How could this possibly be God's plan? Joshua shares God's instructions, and we can pick up the story again in verse 6, where Joshua reads as follows. It says, "After Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests with the ram's horns started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched. And the ark of the Lord's covenant followed behind them. Some of the armed men marched in front of the priests with the horns, and some behind the ark, with the priests continually blowing their horns. "Do not shout, do not even talk," Joshua commanded. "Not a single word from any of you until I tell you to shout. Then shout." So the ark of the Lord was carried around the town once that day, and then everyone returned to spend the night in the camp. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests again carried the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests with the ram's horns marched in front of the ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests with the horns and behind the ark of the Lord. All this time, the priests were blowing their horns. On the second day, they again marched around the town once and returned to camp. They followed this pattern for 6 days. On the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before. But this time, they went around the town 7 times. The 7th time around, as the priests sounded the long blast of their horns, Joshua commanded the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the town." We're going to skip down to verse 20, and I'll explain to you why in a minute. When the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. We're skipping verses 17 and 9 through 19 and a few other verses that we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. But what I want to draw our attention to this morning is just the oddity of God's plan to the city of Jericho. The people of Jericho are frightened beyond compare. They know what God has done with the Israelites up to this point. We heard through Rahab that the city of Jericho knew that God had led the Israelites to victory to all the cities on the eastern side of the Jordan River. We know that the people of Jericho witnessed what God had done in leading the Israelites through the Jordan River to camp right in front of their city. We know that the people of Jericho fully understand that the God of the universe, that the Creator God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, is with Israel. So Jericho knows that their time has come. They're expecting a battle. They're expecting a fight. And so as the city prepares and watches Joshua lead the Israelites towards the city, what do they get? Rather than a siege, they get a parade. Rather than a fight, they get 7 days of watching these Israelites just circle their town. Something's going on. Something odd. Something unexpected. I want to give you guys some fair warning. I don't know if you've been downtown the past weekend, the past few days, but there's a huge distraction now if you're driving towards the city from either side of the western portion of the city, from either side of the Ohio. As you approach the city, coming across the Fort Duquesne, the Fort Pitt, or even if you're on the West End Bridge, and you look towards the city, you might notice that there's a giant plume of water now flowing where the two rivers form to create the Ohio. Aaron and Lee and Charlotte and I drove down on Friday because they were doing the ribbon cutting and the ceremony of launching the fountain again, relaunching the fountain again for the first time in, I think, 4 years. It's been shut down for rehabilitation. And even though I knew that the fountain was turned back on, even though I knew it was going to be there, as we're going down 65 and crossing the Duquesne Bridge, it still captured my attention. It captivated me because of the 150 feet plume of water that is right out there to be seen. It looks odd if you haven't seen it in a while. And I had nearly missed our off-ramp heading off to the city as we were approaching Point State Park. I nearly just completely forgot what we were doing because my attention was drawn to this weird plume of water all of a sudden at the point. The Israelites, I think, were doing something similar in terms of their attack on Jericho. When God had told Joshua that the city was theirs, God had told Joshua that Jericho was going to fall to the Israelites. I can only assume that Joshua fully believed that he was going to be launching a massive attack against the city. A full frontal attack, maybe some flanking moves, maybe some battering rams, maybe some bow and arrow shooting. I can assume that that's what Joshua anticipated because that's what he had known, that's what he had been training for. That's what he had safely assumed God was going to be doing through them. So, but when God commands Joshua instead to march around the city and put on this show for the people of Jericho, I can be sure that Joshua and his warriors were awfully confused. They probably had no idea why God was doing this. No idea why God was making them vulnerable. Why God wasn't just having them attack the city and go after it. and do it themselves, do it the traditional way, so to speak. And being from the Jericho's perspective, I can imagine that they were a bit caught off guard as well. They were expecting an attack. They were expecting to be just battered down and destroyed, which they ultimately were, but not in the way that they anticipated. And so when Israel shows up at the gates of Jericho and they start marching in circles, I can't help but think that the warriors of Jericho were thinking that their attention was caught off guard. That they were focusing on this parade that they were receiving. They were expecting battering rams, but instead they got ram's horns. They were expecting mighty warriors with flashing swords, except they got a faithful nation with few words. They were expecting a single assault to end it all. Instead they got 7 days of just continual assault. The Israelite warriors had trained and were prepared for an epic battle. They surely must have questioned God's strategy. It not only made them look foolish, but it must have made them fearful of being vulnerable to Jericho's attacks. But the city of Israel, the nation of Israel, was faithful, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down. And the walls came down, and the city was captured. Like the endless fitness programs, the diets, the gym commercials, we live in a world of countless religious beliefs. We live in a world of countless philosophies and endless claims of truth. And to the world, to the unbelieving world looking at the church, they see Christianity as nothing more than just another one of the options, another clanging cymbal, shouting and claiming truth over somebody else's. The world expects and often sees Christians fighting tooth and nail for ownership of truth with a capital T. But notice how Jesus throughout the gospel shares the truth with his contemporaries. Notice how Jesus acts out truth in selfless service and love and compassion before ever engaging in any type of discussion concerning it. Notice how Jesus brings down the defensive walls of people who are expecting to have to go to fight for what they believe in and fight for what they know or what they believe they know by capturing their attention with the last thing that anyone ever expected to receive from them: selfless love and sacrifice and compassion. This is why Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, the message of the cross is foolish to those who are headed for destruction. But we who are being saved know it is the very power of God. The cross is the ultimate expression of selfless love and compassion. The cross is a complete mystery to the world expecting a Messiah to come on a throne. The world expects a war of words and arguments over truth. Instead, it gets a crucified king forgiving us and loving us, even as we drive those stakes into his hands and into his feet. When Jesus commands us, when he commands his disciples to love our enemies, when he commands us to lower ourselves to that of servants in our world, when he commands us to pour ourselves out for the sake of others, he's not suggesting that truth is irrelevant. He's not suggesting that the only thing that matters is making others feel good. What Jesus is commanding us to do is to break through the barriers, to tear down those defensive walls, and give the world the last thing it expects from a religious group. To give it love, to give it selflessness, to give it compassion, so that we ourselves, just like Jesus, can earn the right to be heard when we're invited to do so. Rather than being irrational creatures of judgment and hate, we're commanded to offer love and sacrifice so that we ourselves catch folks off guard and lower their defenses and earn the right to share the truth of the gospel when it's ready to be heard. Rather than seeking an eye for an eye, we're commanded to change a life by turning the other cheek and seeking forgiveness and second chances. Rather than spilling harsh words of judgment and hatred, we can help someone want a better life for themselves by just showing them what grace and selflessness looks like. Rather than manning religious picket lines and protests, we can change the world with parades of love and good tidings and no expectations of return to ourselves. This world expects that we're going to come into it and just demand that they believe what we believe. That they believe our way of viewing the world. This world expects us to argue tooth and nail for truth. The last thing it expects is just to be loved and to be served and to be given a second chance. We have the opportunity to tear down walls just like the Israelites tore down the walls of Jericho by circling people with love and grace and compassion and inviting them to see for themselves that there is a better option for them out there. So this morning, as we close, I want to encourage you to not look at this world as an opportunity to get up on a soapbox and just preach and just preach and just preach. I want to invite you this morning to look at this world as an opportunity to love, an opportunity to serve, an opportunity to do the unexpected, so that when the unexpected is done and we capture the attention of those around us, we have the opportunity to be heard and the name of Jesus can be shared in its fullness. Let's close with a word.